now. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's great to be back with all of you, and Flint will be joining us in just a moment. The screen that was just up a moment ago is the altar, and in front of the Buddha were the names of the people that those of you in the retreat have shared to be kept in remembrance or kept in our hearts and minds over the course of the weekend. So feel free to continue to send names of loved ones as you might have them, and we'll continue to add those names to the altar. And we may have a slight sort of adjustment that we'll make at the end of on Sunday. So we'll talk a little bit further about where we might do a remembrance of those people. So. So hopefully everybody made it. It looks like there's a few less people that were on than yesterday. So I imagine there may be a few people that they may still be finding their way and using the webinar link. So hopefully everybody makes it. I'm going to turn things over to Flint in just a moment, and then I will come back on at the end of our time together with Flint, and I'll give a sort of a three-step tutorial of how we're going to easily and quickly transition from webinar mode to meeting mode. And I'll walk people through that process so that way we can transition for the evening reflection for those people that want to participate in that. So with that, I will invite Flint on and we will turn it over to him.
Thanks, Ryan.
Absolutely.
As you said, it's good to be back. It's a different step. This second day, the first full day after we began the retreat yesterday, because something has begun to form as a container. Something's begun to settle. Just beginning as we find our way and we find each other, begin to orient ourselves to what brought us here and what can unfold in the space that we're creating together. And I hope that you all enjoyed, excuse me, a lovely meditation and relational practice time earlier in the day. It's been a deep day for me as I continue to reflect on the core essence of what I'd like to offer. It's a strange thing when you're in this role to know that there are in some ways only a few essential things to teach. And the different ways that they can be brought forward with the specific longings that you all expressed to me. So I'm going to work to continue to do that. Yesterday, as we work our way through the title, Awakening through Unraveling, turning everyday experience into spiritual practice, we focused on our overall container, but mostly on what awakening stands for. And we're going to touch on that again today. But we're also going to move to the unraveling, which is kind of at the heart of the activity of the struggles that we're meeting these days. I thought it was altogether appropriate that our first evening, our first time together, was on the same day as the final presidential debates. Hopefully, you found an energetic contrast between those two offerings. So I thought to begin tonight with our emphasis on unraveling as a central theme, in which we'll focus on surrender and renunciation, different ways the Buddha taught. I thought I would start with a story. And so this is your hopefully not a bedtime story, so I want you to stay awake. A very short story, and I want to read it to you because it's quite beautiful the way it's written. And it's actually part of the introduction to the biography of Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who was the founding teacher and priest at the San Francisco Zen Center, where I did most of my formal training. His lineage is the lineage in which I'm ordained. And Tassajara, the monastery where I did most of my monastic training, is where this vignette is set. The biography entitled Crooked Cucumber, you have to read the book to find out what that means, by the author David Chadwick, was an early student of Suzuki Roshi in the 60s. He's also a fellow Texan from Fort Worth. And here's what he wrote. One night in February of 1968, I sat among 50 black-robed fellow students, mostly young Americans, at Zen Mountain Center at Tassajara Springs, 10 miles inland from Big Sur, California, deep in the mountain wilderness. The kerosene lamplight illuminated our breath in winter air of the unheated room. Before us, the founder of the first Zen Buddhist monastery in the Western Hemisphere, Shunryu Suzuki, had concluded a lecture from his seat on the altar platform. Thank you very much, he said softly with a genuine feeling of gratitude. He took a sip of water, cleared his throat, and looked at his students. Is there some question? He asked, just loud enough to be heard above the sound of the creek gushing in the darkness outside. I bowed. This is David speaking, of course. Hands together, caught his eye. Hi, he said, meaning yes. Suzuki Roshi, I've been listening to your lectures for years, I said, and I really love them, and they're very inspiring. And I know that what you're talking about is actually very clear and simple, but I must admit, I just don't understand. I love it, but I feel like I could listen to you for 1,000 years and still not get it. Could you please just put it in a nutshell? Could you reduce Buddhism to one phrase? Everyone laughed. He laughed. You know, what a ludicrous question. I didn't think any of us expected him to answer it. He was not a man you could pin down, and he didn't like to give his students really something definite to cling to. He had often said not to have some idea of what Buddhism was. But Suzuki did answer. He looked at me and said, everything changes. Then he asked for another question. Everything changes. Everything unravels. But it's interesting that unraveling is just from our personal perspective, actually. So let's talk a little bit more about what that might mean and how it might be appropriate to all of the questions that you asked, the things that you sent to me, what we're studying and practicing with. The basic idea, realizing that everything changes, that's not difficult to understand. All of us get that. We see it, and it's not complex to understand intellectually or to experience in our lives. Living more deeply with this reality means hopefully that we slowly come to realize that it's not just that things change, but nothing is actually what it seems to be. Almost everything we do, even if we understand this fact of impermanence, is to nail down something solid, something real, something we can count on, something that is conceivable, maybe even something we can believe in. So to begin to live our way into the full understanding, or at least a deeper understanding of impermanence, can be both profoundly disturbing and immensely liberating. So let's look at it from a few perspectives. If we look at it first a little philosophically, just on the surface of what it means, I think we tend to hold reality like something exists for a while and then it doesn't exist. That's how you might explain it to a child if you were speaking about impermanence. I'm here. I know I won't always be here. Everything is passing in and out, and we are literally, each of us, coming into being and disappearing moment by moment. So this takes it a little further. If that weren't true, we actually wouldn't get any older. Our children wouldn't grow up, and we wouldn't have the sense that we're being ruined moment by moment, it seems like. So we're both here and not here at the same time. And when I say not here, I don't mean we don't exist, but the way that we think we're a solid thing is in some ways not a reality. Nothing exists independently of everything else. And nothing stands outside of this contingent flow of life. There are no things that exist and then don't exist. Everything is in flux. Everything is moving. Some things on a different scale of time and in space, but everything is moving. The great Buddhist teacher and philosopher Nagarjuna, several centuries after the Buddha, wrote an amazing discourse, but he basically said, among many things, impermanence makes everything possible. We often think of it as impermanence takes everything away, but impermanence makes everything possible because things are changing. They can grow, they can become, and then disappear and become and disappear. So philosophically, just knowing that things change is still, once again, a self-centered perspective. I see that flower is blooming and now it wilts. I see that the paint on the side of the house with the sun needs repainting. My children grow. I feel myself aging. Things are changing because we have an idea of what things are, and then they're not that way anymore. But actually, there's only a contingent flow of experience. And when we segment it up from our individual perspectives, it looks like things change. So psychologically, we have to deal with this flow, with these changes, as the changes move through time. And mostly we reveal our, I would say our maturity, our capacity, certainly our maturing in practice, in the ways that we react and move with changes. Often when we're sitting together in a zendo and we're doing so inside the forms for example, of Soto Zen practice, and some of you have done this and some not. There are certain ways to step into the space, to move to your seat, to bow, forms of posture. There are bells and various sounds which help us know how to coordinate our movements. And then we move from that into a lecture, or we move from the Dharma talk into work, or we take a break, or there's a meal, or there's a cleanup. The real maturity and the depth of our practice doesn't necessarily show when we're sitting quietly in zazen, in meditation, or even when we're walking together. It usually shows in the transitions. Do we think something ends and then the next thing begins? Do we think the thing in between isn't practice and then we'll go to the next practice? Do we think when the Dharma talk is over or the discussion in the evening, then you go to your life and then in the morning you'll start again? So it's useful to investigate all the ways our conditioning has shaped our particular style, and so that we respond to change in these habitual ways, particularly around losses or threats of loss, which is what we're dealing with so much these days. Each moment is like, Brendan yesterday mentioned Hakomi, a mindfulness-based practice of assisted self-discovery and mindfulness. And there's a term that's used, a probe, which can sound a little disquieting. Really, all it means is something that is offered in the relationship, in this assisted self-discovery process, which calls forward a response so we can see how we're shaped. We can understand our habit patterns and how we organize experience. It's an invitation to see how our individual selves that we've created, what we called in our chant the self-centered dream, how that responds to the threat or the change or the loss. Our protector parts, another kind of language we use sometimes, come forward to try to manage things, especially if there's not a deep felt sense or some experience of our true self being present, which can meet and hold and transform the situation as it moves. So we become smaller, more limited in an attempt to control what we feel like is out of control. To lose something means that we think we had something. But the deeper understanding of impermanence suggests that we don't have anything. There's this ongoing contingent dance of relationships, and there's nothing but relationship. So kind of philosophically, we understand that impermanence is more than just things changing. And if we step beyond our self-centered view of things, we begin to understand this flow. But of course, we can't step completely outside of ourselves, and it's not useful to do so. We need to understand ourselves deeply psychologically. And if we turn our gaze back, we can see the habit patterns we use, the automatic patterns and reactivities we have when we meet change. And those of us who have had therapeutic experience, and most of us have, either as a client or a therapist, we know that attachment styles and all these things really have a lot to do with how we're going to meet the comings and going. The very research on attachment was based on a child separating from a parent and reuniting, coming and going. And practically, let's look at a third sort of portal into impermanence. Simply being alive, living, is I would say by definition, living is a constant, interdependent, contingent, changing reality. Life is not static, it's not a thing. And this is the everydayness of impermanence and its consequences, like the immediacy of being present, the intimacy of meeting ourselves and each other in the moment, our responsiveness to the world, and our willingness or unwillingness to say yes to life. Determines much of how things go. And this notion of learning through practice to say yes, not to lie down, not to succumb, not to be passive, not to like, not to approve of, but to say, oh, this is what's happening. I will choose it so I can respond to it in a wholesome manner, is a very different point of view than constantly negotiating with life. What you like, what you don't like, what you'll accept, we'll get deeper into this. So we have this human perspective, a narrow my perspective, held in time. And what spiritual practice allows us is to slowly soften our grip, our grasping on this small perspective and the insistence on an understanding of time as linearity. Just ask yourself the simple question, a practice question you can live with and maybe do some journaling about. What do I want to hold on to? What am I afraid to lose? Very simple, direct questions. But they begin to touch on the realities that we cling to and those that we turn away from or fear losing. And refusing reality can feel like safety and protection to all of those protector parts of us. But this refusal ultimately causes pain and suffering. Facing reality more intimately and with more immanence, like I spoke about, can in the moment feel more challenging or even more painful. But it is the ultimate unfolding balm for the suffering for ourselves and for other people. Refusing reality is going to cause long-term pain. Meeting the short-term challenges of reality and saying yes may be uncomfortable, but is actually the resolution of the suffering that we seek to resolve. So all those are a lot of words and different perspectives on impermanence, but let me give you another personal perspective through a brief poem. And this poem was offered to me during the last retreat that was sponsored by the Open Doors Zen community in Madison. It was not one that I used in my teaching, but it was from one of the former head students there in Madison, Catherine Coleman, who's a wonderful woman, a marvelous therapist, a good friend, and an amazing practice leader. She and her husband, Don, both. And without giving you too much background, but some so you can understand some of the references in this very brief poem. They've been going through many changes in their lives as their children have grown up and grandchildren have been born. They've met their own everyday health issues like we all do. They've just sold the home in which they raised their children and moved into a smaller place, and a lot of changes. And when she wrote this poem during the retreat, they were sort of on retreat themselves, but really just a relaxing one in New Mexico. They traveled from Wisconsin to New Mexico. And there were some images from an old poem we were using, an ancient teaching from the Zen tradition about how snow in a silver bowl was an image for the relative and the absolute merging. A heron in the moonlight. These are just old images, so she'll refer to those. Some of the I Ching hexagrams, things like this. You also have to understand that and this is another important point, I think, because this poem encompasses so much, that they're a mixed race couple, um, and have lived in a wonderful marriage and have beautiful children from this marriage. So here's her offering that she just sent to me, and I asked her permission today if I could read it as a way of giving you a more embodied personal sense of the things that I'm talking about here. She starts with a line that comes from the Shin Shin Ming in her own way. She says, "The way is not difficult for those who are unattached to their preferences. Snow melts in a silver bowl. Sun rises on the heron. The hexagram Li, which is fire, changes as all things do. Dharma is delivered by President Trump. Can you hear it? In the dry grasses of New Mexico, foreground and background merge, sitting so still, a mockingbird wing brushes my cheek. Our lovers' hands, brown and lighter, creating a pattern of energy which pulses through the universe, giving and receiving the gift of life. The way is not difficult for those who are unattached to their preferences." Snow melts in a silver bowl, sun rises on the heron, the hexagram Li, fire changes as all things do. And then that startling line in the middle, Dharma is delivered by President Trump. Can you hear it? In the dry grasses of New Mexico, foreground and background merge. Sitting so still, a mockingbird's wing brushes my cheek. Our lovers' hands, brown and lighter, creating a pattern of energy which pulses through the universe, giving and receiving the gift of life. Almost every aspect of the teachings, almost every level of what you asked is incorporated in the poem. The way in which our self-centered dream causes suffering, how we can open to the larger view, and the way opens as our contractions and differences melt, as awakening brings the sun forward, as we understand that everything is burning, everything is in the fire. And the Dharma is the way things are, the truth of the way things are. And how is our current president demonstrating something true about the way things are, like it or not? And in the great field of nature, in this case in New Mexico, something about what's close and what's far away begin to shift. And if we sit in our practice, we're touched by the intimacy of the moment, like a bird's wing brushing our face. And that image of a dark hand and a light hand, a brown one and a lighter one, which is so beautifully said, together, creating a pattern of energy, like the yin yang, which pulses through the universe. It's all there is this pulse in the universe, giving and receiving the gift of life. This is what practice offers us, that possibility. When the Buddha was teaching, one of his very first talks he gave was to a group of people in northern India who were fire worshippers. There was their yogic practice, and so the Buddha was such a great rhetorician. He would use analogies and images from the people he was speaking to help them understand what he was trying to teach. It's why I ask you to give me things about what's going on in you so I can speak to you in some ways. And he said very simply, everything is burning. It's a little close to home for those of you in California on the West Coast. Everything is burning. Or in Colorado. He was very prophetic because the Buddha understood how the forces that drive most of our human longings and endeavors in the world are like consuming fires. And he even said in his talk, burning with what? He asked a question so he could answer it. Everything is burning. Burning with what? He said, with the fire of greed, with the fire of dislike, with the fire of stupidity, greed, hate, delusion, attachment, aversion, confusion, whatever you want to say. And he understood that this world was ablaze with these fires, and that this unchecked would lead to a barren wasteland where nothing can grow or flourish. And this is how it feels sometimes, isn't it? This is also how it feels a little bit. Some of you spoke about the number of changes that are occurring, the difficulty in transition, the impact it's having on your relationships, the struggle with how to manage those things, the way strong emotions threaten to overwhelm you. What is, when we're ablaze with this burning, with our grasping, with our aversion, with our confusion, with our turning away, what's left as we attempt to sort through and negotiate life can be quite barren until we start by saying yes, by turning toward. And the Four Noble Truths, which is the way they're typically described and the way they're typically taught, is there is suffering, is the nature of most things, or dukkha, that this is caused by this greed, hate, and delusion, that there is a way for it to cease, and that there's a path to that cessation. And that's a very practical way to think about it in some ways. But the Buddha never taught these as truths or as prescriptions in a way. He taught them as tasks to do. And some of you have probably read Stephen Batchelor's work, who's, I think, most cogent in this way. Instead, we can think of it as, number one, embrace suffering. This is the yes. This is the willingness. 2, let our reactive emotions be. 3, see and appreciate the cessation of the reactivity. And number 4, respond with care. It's a very different formulation of precisely the core of the teachings. Embrace suffering. Well, I'm going to go back into this a little more. Say yes. Oh, I'm willing to look. Let our reactive emotions be what they are, and notice how they are self-liberating if they're not messed with too much. And respond with care to what needs care, including some of your emotions. His final recorded words were variously translated. Things fall apart. Tread the path with care. And here we are. This is our retreat. Things are falling apart. Tread the path with care. According to the Buddha, in some of the more traditional teachings, it says, a well-instructed, noble disciple, old language, sees this burning and thus becomes disenchanted with the sense spaces and their mental sequelae. So we can reflect on the ways that we meet the world and how in meeting it we use our sensory system, our body, our mental data, construct a world that we then react to as if the construction were the world. We live in virtual reality. These things that you put on to see virtual reality, we're just trying to replicate what our mind does. What our practices do is help us soften into a capacity to be intimate with the immediacy of each moment so that we can respond appropriately. no matter what happens, rather than the virtual reality we create, which attempts to gather us up into places we enjoy, push away the stuff we don't, ignore some of the rest. So these old texts that used a formula, and it's found in dozens of discourses, to describe the manner in which this kind of disenchantment leads to liberation of suffering. And I like the word disenchantment because it's like we're enchanted with our own minds. And here's the classic formulation. And then we're going to go back to the 4 tasks and take a look at it. Here's the way it's usually translated. And remember, the monks following the Buddha in northern India, the Theravadan position was, I'm going to practice so I can get off the cycle of birth and death, rebirth. This is a time in which rebirth was just kind of the background assumed. It came out of a Hindu tradition. There was no Buddhism. This reincarnation was like just assumed. So you'll see where this comes in. Disenchanted, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, she's fully released. With full release, there is the knowledge fully released. He discerns that birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, no task. The task is done. There's nothing further in this world. As if one could complete no more rebirth. That's kind of what it's looking at. But if you remove the idea of rebirth, let's take that out for a minute because that's not part of our discussion and I don't think it's required actually. If we take that out of the task and then map this old formulation onto our 4 practice principles, we might translate it like this. And I'm going to give you these notes like I did yesterday so you don't have to copy it down. Remember we chanted, caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. But each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, is compassion's way. Okay. If we map this onto the old formulation of being disenchanted and becoming dispassionate, no longer caught, being released, and the task is done, here's the way I would say it. No longer caught in the self-centered dream. A person quiets the enchantment of self-centered thoughts. When self-centered thoughts begin to quiet down, there is a gentle release from the habits of conditioned reactivity. With the release from the habits of reactivity, simple present moment awareness opens and comes to the fore. This primary awareness, which is stillness, with no preference, does not cling nor push away, is not confused, then you're completely free to respond to life as it is. So it's a little bit different formulation using this old and our new 4 practice principles. And you can see both the spiritual path and a little bit of the therapeutic healing path in that. No longer recreating or rebirthing the same patterns of suffering for self and other, if you want to bring rebirth back and forget reincarnation. We're no longer recreating the same old suffering for ourselves and others. So these 4 tasks that Stephen Batchelor, I said, had formulated, I think are quite useful. And they're interconnected. Embrace suffering, let go of let our reactive emotions be, see the stopping of reactivity and respond with care. So embrace suffering. This is the capacity to unblend, to form a witness, to turn toward the inevitable. I wouldn't even say suffering, just turning toward the inevitable, interdependent, ongoing change. But we don't usually like that. And so it becomes suffering, and it's unnecessary because there are things that are painful. In fact, he listed the definitions of dukkha in the Buddha's talk of illness, old age, death, lamentation. He listed all these things. But really all they were is what happens in life. They weren't mistakes. They weren't things to be um, corrected or hidden from. He basically said life is everything that it is. So embrace life in everything that it is. There are no circumstances under which it is wise to refuse life. So it's as if we're choosing our suffering, not like, hooray, I have suffering, but this is what's happening. And if I don't choose it, I'm not going to be intimate with it and I won't know how to move with it. Embrace suffering. 2, let our reactive emotions be. It's like not learning to not feed our reactivity, not reinforce our habit patterns. This is what we discover and uncover when we explore ourselves deeply in meditation, in psychotherapy, and through spiritual practice in particular. In meditation and zazen, we continue to step into this larger space and a deeper presence to meet each moment rather than trying to change or get rid of the difficulty. So it's a stepping back and opening a spaciousness so that we can turn toward what needs to be met. The Buddha said at one point, when asked, what do we do with difficult emotions? He said, gaze upon them with kindness and remain still. Let our reactive emotions be. And number 3, see the stopping of reactivity. This is the containment, the holding of intimacy, the care of what's arising. This is the word that's translated, we use for our meditation center in Austin, appamada. It means diligent, mindful care. How to hold what arises, not smother it, because we're reactive, not try to get rid of it, not turn away from it. Hold it so through the alchemical process of practice, of the dual practice of growing up and waking up, we can transform that energy and use that energy for good for everyone. And then that is number 4, respond with care, mindful, diligent care in the world through compassionate action. I'm going to read just a tiny bit from Batchelor. Once again, he's another person who writes so beautiful. He said, these 4 tasks demand direct engagement with life itself, irrespective of any prior beliefs about the origin and end of suffering or the nature of the self. They're just tasks. By entering into a contemplative, empathic, and existential relationship with the pain of the world, one seeks to respond with situation-specific compassion. I'm going to stop there for a second. Imagine, I know this is silly, but imagine if you're sworn in as a representative in the House of Representatives or a senator, let alone the president or any other public official, if part of it was saying, by entering into a contemplative, empathic, and existential relationship with the pain of the world, I would hope that you would seek to respond with situation-specific compassion. Also in our neighborhoods, neighbor to neighbor, among countries, friend to friend. So I'll go on. The challenge is to tackle the crisis at hand, which may be unprecedented, and find imaginative responses that may not have occurred to anyone before. Once again, I'll stop. Isn't that our situation right now in what we're asking? The challenge is to tackle the crises, I'll make it plural, at hand. Climate change, politics, pandemic, racism, just on and on. The challenge is to tackle the crises at hand, which may be unprecedented, in fact, they are, and to find imaginative responses that may not have occurred to anyone before, because that's what's being called forward. Continuing, taking into account the causal role played by psychological factors such as greed, dislike, stupidity, one's primary concern is to arrive at a response based on an understanding of the full range of particular concerns, our biological, social, economic, religious, political, that underlie and contribute to the crisis. Once again, you'll get this longer quote, which has a lot in it to unpack, but I thought it was so apropos our situation right now. And when you sent me the emails that you did, and I took them and sifted through and came up with the sort of 5 categories that they fell into. First was transitions and challenges. You know, we were met with, I am, a sense of helplessness and groundlessness. Things are being pulled out from under us faster than we can get our balance. And a sense of helplessness. You see things being played out, which are horrific, and it appears that nothing's happening. And Joanna Macy talks about our inborn sort of way of meeting the world is to explain, predict, and control. If we can explain it, and we can predict what's going to happen and then control it, like, we're good. But that actually is the prescription for suffering. Not that we shouldn't respond appropriately, of course, but only if we first can appreciate our life, appreciate what's happening, understand what's happening. Then our transitions and challenges become the next Dharma gate, the next step forward, rather than just one damn thing after another that's difficult. It may be that too, but it's more. This is the Dharma that's being shown us. The second group from your responses were about relationship struggles. And really what's happened through the pandemic and so many other things that are happening and the divisions is it's as if you're putting a spotlight on attachment disruptions, of ruptures to intimacy, the demands that are being placed on us to manage what's happening, and the drop in nourishment because we can't be with each other and care for each other. That gap is undermining our resilience. And so we have to take extra good care of ourselves and each other instead of just going with what's happening automatically. Care for each other in relationship. The third area was the overwhelm of fear, anger, sadness, all the things that we've been talking about. And this is why on the 4 tasks, it's important to meet and contain what's arising. This is a whole nother direction for both psychotherapeutic things, which help us work with what's stuck and not moving easily, and our spiritual practice, which is continually opening a space of presence and continually calling forward our Buddha nature, our true nature, so that we're led by that trueness and that goodness rather than led by our reactivity. Then the 4th area that you had talked about was connecting with a deeper presence. And this is the natural outcome of practicing that spacious presence, that resting in a true self. And then lastly, people spoke about marveling in the everyday and nourishment, which comes when we've begun to move away from being overwhelmed by the transitions as we move to repair and healing in our relationships. We contain the emotions that are arising in a wholesome way so that they can be worked with, so that fire of reactivity can turn into something that is good and useful rather than something destructive that's burning. There, Buddhism love lists, you know. So I have 3 lists of 3, and Buddhism often has things in 3. And I just offer these to you. Many of you have heard them before, but it's apropos in our speaking about the unraveling to think about them. And they sort of fall into the personal and social, cultural, and philosophical ways that we were talking about impermanence. Here's the first one. And it's much more like a personal practice-centered list of what are the three keys to freedom from suffering. These were offered by Sherry Huber, another Zen teacher. She said, pay attention to everything. Don't believe anything. Don't take anything personally. Now, these are fierce requirements, invitations, challenges. Number one, pay attention to everything. This is mindfulness. This is a capacity to be awake and pay attention. There's nothing that is useful to disregard. Number two, don't believe anything. Don't get stuck in belief. Don't make something into a belief. There's an old teaching story in which Mara, who is the tempter of the Buddha, to try to throw him off, kind of like the devil or something, he and his minions are seeing someone walk down the road who has awakened. And so one of the helpers to Mara says, uh-oh, we got a problem here. Someone has waked up. What are we going to do? And Mara said, oh, don't worry about it. They'll just turn it into a belief. They'll make it small and make it into a thing instead of stay with a contingent, alive, ongoing movement of reality that is much more intimate and much more simple. So this is what she's talking about, and don't believe anything. Don't get stuck, nailed down. Keep paying attention. Don't believe anything. And number three, don't take anything personally. Don't orient yourself as there's me, and then there's reality. Because as soon as you extract yourself from the flow, then you put in motion suffering. That cheeky little quote that Sojin Roshi has mentioned to me in my training that I've said to so many of you before. He said, our job is not to take anything personally, even if it's meant. It'd be interesting in debate, wouldn't it? To realize that such absurdities and lies don't apply. That's kind of easy. But what about when they're closer? So stay attentive. Don't lock down on a belief. And don't create more self-centered dream out of what's happening. If you take that into the larger perspective of what's happening in our world and how to respond to it, then the Buddhist Peacemaker Order offers us three tenets. In some ways, they're very similar. They say when you walk into any situation of conflict, difficulty, pain in the world, walk in with, number one, a don't know mind, not knowing. Don't go in with a belief. Don't go in with an expectation. Don't go in with a preconceived idea. Go in open. Beginner's mind. Number two, bear witness deeply. Look, listen, feel, receive. Don't go in busy to try to make a difference. Then number three, compassionate action can flow from that space, which may be novel. Beginner's mind, bearing deep witness, then compassionate action. And the philosophical number three, these are bigger ideas, but they're so powerful. They're a formulation by Peter Hershock, who actually lives in Honolulu and is a wonderful teacher. He said, awakening, which we spoke about yesterday, involves what he calls the relinquishment of horizons. And if you think for a moment, what is a horizon? From where I'm sitting right now, if I happen to look out the window to what is my right, I can see the horizon off the north shore of Molokai. I can see the ocean and the sky. I can see land's end. I can see the edge of the ocean. I can see the sky. But I know that that horizon out there in the ocean isn't a thing. It's an illusion. It's an apparent edge. But if I were to move, it would move. And so to relinquish horizons means to give up grasping at what we think is a barrier or an edge. And here's the three horizons that are automatically relinquished as we wake up. And the three keys to freedom that Sherry Huber mentions, to pay attention, don't believe anything, to take anything personally, is a central way to practice. Buddhist Peacemaker says, and if you're practicing and you're going to relate to other people and other systems, do so with beginner's mind, bearing witness very deeply so that compassionate action can flow. And then these three horizons might soften. They might be relinquished, as Peter says. First one, the horizon for relevance. That line where we say, this is what's important, but that's not. I need to pay attention to this, but not that. There is no horizon for relevance. Everything is relevant. Everything is to be paid attention to. And in the awakened mind, that's not just a prescription for what to do. It's when you're awake, that's naturally what happens. There's not a horizon for relevance. Secondly, the horizon for readiness. Well, I'm prepared to do this, but not that. I'm trained to do this, but I could. The awakened mind says yes and steps forward, not judging what's relevant or not what you're ready for. It's just a simple willingness. I don't mean stepping into stupid situations and being, I don't mean that in a practical way. I'm saying from a larger perspective. One finds a way to orient oneself to the world. So that number three also comes to bear in a very powerful way, and that is the horizon for responsibility. I'm responsible for that, but not that. And in our interdependent, globalized world, we're realizing that there is no edge in our world, for example. What happens here affects you there. What happens to me happens to you. Everything is relevant. We have to be ready for what comes, because our responsibility, not for, but to it all, doesn't take a break. And once again, these ideas, and I'll stop here in just a moment, are, I know, big, and this is I'm giving you a lot of teachings here, and I'll send you these in the notes so you can take a look at them further. So let's step back for a second into the kind of teachings that give us a different feeling, which once again is poetry. And we'll go to what I laughingly call one of the patron saints of my teaching, which is Mary Oliver. A poem which many of you are familiar with, but listen to it now in terms of, through the lens of enlightenment and endarkenment, which we spoke about yesterday, which opens us to awakening, impermanence, how everything is interdependent and burning, how nothing stays, everything is lost, but everything is made possible by impermanence, and our orientation through practice so that we can move in the world by not creating so much suffering for ourselves and others, and to be of service to others. Through those lenses, now listen to this poem, which of course always for Mary starts in nature. Look, she says, look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, are giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds. And every pond, no matter what its name, is nameless now. Every year, everything I've ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this. The fires in Black River of Loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. The Buddha said, make of yourself a light. The trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light. Can we turn our own lives into light, life force through practice? She says, giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. And you know this, being around people who you can tell take good care of themselves and others in the world in a way that is more spacious, with full presence. And there's almost a fragrance of goodness. And we watch how things move, cattails bursting, changing, seeding the world. And the ponds, every pond, no matter what its name, is nameless now. That through practice, we let go of beliefs, we let go of the things we can grasp, we let go of the way we nail down life, and everything is living perfectly fine without a name. And as we move through, she says, every year, everything I've ever learned leads back to this. The fires and black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, impermanence. We lose everything, impermanence makes everything possible. Whose meaning none of us will ever know. But we can do three things. We can love what is mortal. We can hold it against our bones, knowing that our own life depends on it. And when it's time to let it go, to let it go. So we learn about renunciation. We learn about surrender, not as a stepping back and refusing anything. Suzuki Roshi said, renunciation isn't giving up things in this world. It's just realizing that they all go away. And to surrender doesn't mean to give up. In this case, it means to give in and move with by softening into strength. Softening into strength, not hardening. And we call that, in Buddhism, refuge. And you don't have to get it right now, but if you look at the refuges on your chant sheet, it will say, I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. We'll start with the refuges. It'll be a good way to talk about the turn. But now I think we should turn to each other in this last half hour like we've done yesterday and speak to those who want to raise their hand. I know there were some folks yesterday that were ready and we didn't get to speak. And I would be really, really happy to talk to you now. I hope that I haven't put you to sleep or given you too much. But I have a lot that I want you to have. And so I try to do my best to offer it in a way that is that you can receive it.
That's fine.
There we go. Is this Annette?
Hello. Hi. Hello.
Good to see you.
Yes. I'm on a new device and I'm trying to get adjusted here, so apologies. We were listening to your talk.
I see you.
We were listening to your talk in a relaxed position, and so we just had to jump. I had to jump to a different spot to chat. And I don't know if you remember the last time we talked, but right before you were leaving for your flight, I had come up in tears and I said, I feel like I'm never going to see you again.
Sure enough.
Yep, because my intuition is powerful than I would care to admit sometimes. But it's good to see you.
It is good to see you. We do get to see each other, and hopefully, I certainly pray and commit to being there if I can, whenever the time is right. You know.
Yeah. So the thought that I have, and I think it falls in line with what you were just talking about a bit, with the three. There was a lot that I just tried to absorb into my brain. So the last three things that you just
The horizons.
spoke about. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
His it's a beautiful reflection, first off, being in this space, because it there's more space for self-reflection, because you're not having to navigate the nuances of all the energies of other people around you. And so it's been nice reflecting on the process and the growth and the years of sitting. And I'm experiencing myself in this place of feeling on like this cusp or this precipice of being ready to be in the world with truly embodying that compassion, not just at home or with people who feel safe or my clients, but in the world. But there's lots of horizons that feel that they're in the way a little bit still. And it's one
too.
right.
All of us.
And even as I'm reflecting on that, I had woke up this morning with this thought of like, how do you be in the world and be open? Because being in the world with compassion leaves you open. And then as you talked about those horizons, I was like, well, maybe I don't need to be open all the time, but then.
Well, you have to watch what your definition of open is.
Right.
Because most people, I think, will translate it as undefended or vulnerable. And I think that's not necessarily what's being asked for. To meet the world just as it is, not pushing your agenda on it, but also not pulling away or distorting it, to try to meet the world like it is so that you can respond appropriately. So compassion isn't just being open-hearted and nice. Compassion is a more fierce function of seeing suffering and not turning away, staying and to see what's needed. And so if you want to take compassion into the world, it means in some ways you're becoming a kind warrior. You're gonna meet stuff that's difficult, and you're gonna find what you can tolerate and what you can't, the things that trigger you and the things that don't, because that will happen. And to be first real compassionate to yourself, knowing that that's going to happen, and then do your best to use it as a curriculum to learn about your own reactivity. You can think of it as a problem that you should get over, or you could think of it as a rich curriculum. Wow, it's given me all this information about how I organize myself in relation to the world. Then you can have more choice.
And what would you say about doing that in the world where there isn't necessarily boundary, right? So in relationship that's defined, there's boundary, right? It's client or friend or partner, there's boundary. And when you're in the world, in community, strangers, all of those things, there's not the same boundary.
Well, you can hold your boundaries however you wish. There's no agreement, subtle or explicit, about boundary. It's chaotic. You never know.
Right. That's part of the problem. That's part of.
That's why you have to. That's why you have to bear witness and stay awake. It's just about wakefulness, because there are times when you can see that there are certain places it's plainly unsafe to be. And so the most wise and compassionate action is to get the hell out of there. Not every wise action is going toward. The toward is paying attention so you'll know what to do. So you know what the best course of action is. And so there are times when it's pretty chaotic and pretty dangerous. And so you need to take really good care of yourself. And that requires staying awake and alert so you don't go to sleep. Or don't think I should do this, or a good person would do that. See, those are beliefs. They get in the way of seeing what's actually necessary in the moment. So this is an ongoing, for the rest of your life, practice. And hopefully we'll see each other so we can keep doing it together.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, and me.
Hey,
I Flint.
we get 2 for 1.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
You too.
Thank you, Flint.
Thank you. It's good to see your face and hear your voice. I see a dove, which would mean that Suzanne may be alighting soon here. There she is. She has to unmute herself, but hello, Suzanne.
Hello, Flint. So I want to go back to something you said at the beginning, that that more than everything changes, as Suzuki Roshi summed up Buddhism, that nothing is actually the way we think it is.
Yes. Huh?
And I heard that in a very comforting way. As you know, I'm in these big transitions of letting go of my work of 42 years, which I have absolutely loved, and facing a pretty risky medical procedure soon. And I haven't been seeing myself beyond that. I don't see myself in any future. It doesn't feel like death, although it might be. I don't have those powers.
You don't have to land on any one particular meaning
Yeah,
for it.
and I can conjure a fantasy. I said to my husband, Steve, last night, I'd like to go to a ball game with you sometime after I get through all this. I mean, I can conjure those things, but it doesn't land as in that is my future. And so when you gave us that teaching again, I wondered if what's occurring is, without effort, something is surrendering in me. Some small grip on something small is surrendering. And I would like you to say more about that.
Well, because you're one of those interesting people who like studying Dogen sometimes.
Yeah. Yes, I
And
do.
you know that one of his key phrases, and for those of you who are not familiar with what we're talking about, he's a 13th century Japanese monk who went to China and brought our flavor of Zen back from China to Japan. And Suzuki Roshi is in that line of ordination. Anyway, when he said body and mind of themselves drop away, that's what you're experiencing.
Say that last one again, Flint.
That's what you're experiencing. Body and mind of themselves drop away. It doesn't mean it goes away. It means the way that we hold our mind, the way that we hold our body, the way that we hold this individually constructed self together. We don't have to do anything about it. As we practice on its own, it begins to soften and it opens. It's not as if you're made null and void. It opens because the line that comes before it is, we're actualized by the myriad things. When actualized by the myriad things, body, mind, of self, and other drop away.
I think, Flint, actually, what I'm just remembering as you say that is, I think that was the very first question I ever asked of you, is about myriad things. That just came to my mind. And you said I study Dogen. Of course, I mean, I do. I'm in a Dogen study group. I have absolutely no idea what we're talking about there or what we're reading. I have no understanding. And at the same time, I crave it,
Yeah.
and I get understanding, and intellectually isn't the goal here. And what you just said is that dropping away of body,
Just dropping.
just dropping, just dropping. Okay.
And you're dropping all the ideas, the concepts, the relevance, the horizons, but you're actualized. You're still here only as a result of every other thing in the entire universe. That's the miracle of your existence. You can conjure up a narrative, a story, a vision, an image. You can make a future. You can recall. You can knit all that together, and it doesn't matter.
Okay. Doesn't matter. Okay.
It's interesting. It's good. It holds us together in a certain way. Sure.
Well, something in me does know that it doesn't matter, because it's all happening very spontaneously.
You're softening into that strength of following what's next. And the narratives are important for Steve. He loves you. He doesn't know your narratives are important for your kids and your grandkids, for your students, for those of us who love you. Sure. We do that because we're humans. We need the stories. And we can understand that they're provisional and partial, and also open to this, not instead of, also open to this. But this is the most powerful thing that's happened in a certain way to you. And that is sort of nudging you over the line here to dropping.
Okay.
And that's full of life, not devoid of life.
That's what has had me confused, is it doesn't feel dead, even
No,
though I have no idea if it's about death or not. It doesn't feel dead. It feels very much alive.
all at once you are free, with nothing left to hold on to. The Shin Shin Ming.
Yeah.
That paradox of emptying, self-emptying, but not so you're nothing, so you're full of the whole world. What you're empty of is individuality, particularity. And this for you, not to coin a phrase or be too cute about it, this to you goes right to the marrow.
Well, we know what that's about. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, it does.
literally.
Literally.
And the interdependence that you have to rely on, the marrow of someone else.
And as you say it, it's interesting to me that there's a big risk in that.
Yeah. And a big risk clinging to what you have.
Yes. Yeah, I do feel in that in between place.
So in that medical situation, you're living this teaching quite profoundly.
Thank you.
Thank you as well.
Thank you very much.
Glad you're with us, being willing to listen to all these teachings over and over and over.
Oh, absolutely. And it's just been delightful to be a participant only.
Yes, not having to lead anything. It's great.
And Emily and Ryan and their group is doing such a beautiful
I know, they're fantastic.
work and effort.
Awakening together.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Ah, Sandeep. Oh my gosh.
Hi.
My old friend, I don't see you. I hear you.
Well, okay, hold on. Yeah, there we go. I think my
Oh my
video was
gosh.
off. Probably it was off the whole time.
It's so wonderful to see you.
Yes, it's wonderful to see you.
In a long time, yeah.
Long time, and I'm really excited. I was excited to maybe get to see you in Hawaii, but I guess we missed that opportunity.
Well, maybe there'll be another opportunity. So
But so so when you were sharing today, I think what struck me, you shared the three things, um, which sort of made sense. That pay attention to everything, and then you said believe nothing, and don't take anything personally. So the part that I think got me a little stuck was the believe nothing.
sure.
Because what exactly does that mean? I mean, it is, there clearly is some reality in whatever is happening,
Of
right? Or
course.
not,
You're
or
a scientist too, an engineer.
yeah. So I guess it struck me that, how do I put that into practice? And exactly what can you?
Yeah. Well, my emphasis was really on being stuck on belief.
Hmm,
Sometimes we create ideas and scenarios about other people, about ourselves, about a situation. And then we get stuck on this narrative, and so it becomes a firm belief. It doesn't mean don't accept reality or truth.
mhm.
It means don't create these fantasy things and cling to them as if it's the whole of reality.
I see.
So it's an invitation on the other side to flexibility of mind and heart.
Sure.
So you take
Sure.
things provisional, the sort of not always so.
Mm,
Uh, Suzuki Roshi's famous book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So many people know this book. The
mm.
second book of his teachings is titled Not Always So. So taking things a little, not quite so solid. But it doesn't mean don't believe in things that are required, data.
So is it that there is always a narrative, internal narrative in our minds about what it is that we are seeing or experiencing, and that may not be correct. It may not
Yeah,
want
in the ordinary mind, that's always true.
to. Mm,
Those moments of awakening that I was talking about, it's very interesting to have moments where that part of our consciousness is not so much in play.
mm.
It's not useful to live there, but it gives us a glimpse into the space and the vitality and the porosity of everything. Um, there are times, for example, um, I had a moment during a deep retreat where I could watch what was going on in the Zendo, but I didn't have any ideas about it. I was just it was like the wind blowing, just the
Mm.
unfolding of experience. And as soon as I started to name, oh, it's this person, then it was gone. Then I had a name and a narrative. But there are ways in which we create beliefs more ordinarily and more solidly in everyday life that just simply gets in the way of our seeing deeper into the situation and therefore seeing deeper into new solutions. If I believe my husband or wife is a certain way, or my boss is a certain way, then once I have that idea, I can't see the whole situation. The things I see might actually be true, but it's partial and it's
Mhm.
provisional. So that's really what I'm talking about.
Okay, that
Yeah.
clarifies that clarifies that.
It
Good.
warms my heart to see you.
Thank you. It was great to see you. It's very happy to see you. Thank you.
Glad you're with us this weekend.
Looking forward for the yeah to you this weekend. So.
Thank you. Ryan did send me the entire list of participants, and I also noticed when people were raising their hands, it didn't look like we may have anybody else right now. But I loved seeing all the names and realizing all these ways in which I've known so many of you, and then seeing names that I'm not familiar with, and the great curiosity I have about who you are and how we might connect and what might unfold. Please note that if you raise your hand to come forward, you're essentially making an offering. Because you can see that when someone comes forward and asks a question or we talk for a while, there's a way in which it calls something forward that's of use for everyone. So you're making an offering. It's like putting something on the altar. So I know it may be a little daunting, but I would encourage you. So, and I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. I think you'll have some discussion later. And Ryan, you had some things you wanted to say here at the end?
All right. Are you able to hear me and see me?
I do hear you and see you. I hope everyone else can too.
Oh, good. I will just, so, and Flint, I wasn't sure if you were going to want to transition with us into the next portion or if you were going to take your leave, but you're certainly welcome to join us. So, so as we did this morning when we started off our meeting in group, in the meeting formats that allows us to see everybody on screen at once and then also be separating the breakout groups, we are going to transition from this meeting, which is in webinar format, to a Zoom meeting. And we have an easy way to do that. In just a moment, Bill's going to put in the chat box, and don't click it until you've been given the full instructions. But Bill's going to put in the chat box the meeting format link, which will it'll show up in the chat box and it'll allow you to just click on it. Once you click on it, you're going to see this screen pop up. It'll ask you if you want to open Zoom meetings. The correct answer to that is yes. So click open Zoom meetings, and then it'll ask you if you want to leave and join a new meeting, and hit that button, the red button. It'll say leave and join. And then when you do that, it'll actually remove you from the webinar format and it'll start the transition process. Our transition as attendees moving from webinar to meeting will be slightly faster than Bill's. So Bill is going to wait for people to make that transition. So we'll essentially exit the webinar and then we'll end up in the meeting. So, so it's 3 clicks for us. Bill has a couple more clicks, so he will take a minute. So while Bill is in the process of transitioning the meeting over, you're going to see this separate box that'll pop up that says the host has another meeting in progress. So don't despair when that happens. You are in the right place. And as soon as Bill opens up the meeting, the Zoom meeting format, that will allow you to automatically be moved into that meeting. So you'll click in the chat box. It'll ask if you want to transition or open Zoom meetings. You'll say yes. Open Zoom meetings, leave and join. Again, hit that button and then wait for a few moments and then you'll be in the Zoom meeting, at which point Chris Johnson will give us a little bit of guidance to guide our discussion and reflection upon tonight's Dharma talk. So with that, I will stop screen sharing. And Bill has now added the link to the chat box. And so as you feel ready, click on that button or click on that web link, and then it will automatically initiate that process. And we will see you all in just a moment over in the Zoom meeting.
Just going to wait till the last of you click on that and make that choice to move over. Want to make sure we don't lose the opportunity for you to have that hyperlink available to you, because if I end this meeting before you do, you'll have to find the link through the other emails you've gotten today and previously. We'll give it another few seconds. There you go. We got 6 people left. 5. Oh, now it's 5. 4, 3, 2 more to go. 3 more to go. Aaron, B, and Ma. I'm going to close just in case you may not have be with your computer, so I don't hold things up for others.